The fall of Earth. The sky was burning. Massive alien warships hovered over Earth, their dark metallic bodies blocking out the sun. Cities lay in ruins, their towering buildings reduced to ash and rubble. Smoke filled the air, and the cries of the wounded echoed through empty streets. The enemy had come without warning, striking fast and hard. The invasion was not a battle. It was a massacre. In the last remaining military base beneath the Rocky Mountains, General David Carter stood in front of a large holographic screen. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. The screen showed the brutal reality. Earth's defense fleet had been wiped out. Every major city had fallen. Humanity was losing. A voice crackled through the speakers. It was Captain Reynolds from the last remaining orbital station. "General, we can't hold them any longer. We have 5 minutes before." The transmission cut off. Silence. The soldiers in the command center stared at the screen, waiting, hoping for something. But nothing came. Carter closed his eyes. Another loss. Another city gone. Another fleet destroyed. He turned toward his communication officer. "Send a message. One last call for help." The officer hesitated. "Sir, there's no one left to hear it." Carter's voice was steady but cold. "Send it anyway." Far beyond the solar system, in a distant part of the galaxy, hidden within a dark nebula, something stirred. It was not a planet, nor a space station. It was a fleet, a massive forgotten fleet. The supreme fleet of Earth. They had been exiled long ago, sent away for reasons no one remembered. For decades, they had remained silent, hidden, waiting. Then, a message reached them. Weak, filled with static, but clear enough. "If anyone is still out there, this is our final call for help." Admiral Jonathan Kane opened his eyes. He had been waiting for this moment. He turned to his officers, his voice calm but sharp. "Prepare the fleet. We're going home. Back on Earth." The enemy moved like shadows, sweeping through the remains of Earth's defenses. Their leader, a tall alien warlord with cold black eyes, stood on the bridge of his flagship. He watched as the last human resistance collapsed. A soldier approached him and bowed. "Earth is ours, Supreme Commander." The warlord smiled. He had heard stories of human bravery, of their unbreakable will. But in the end, they were nothing. Weak, helpless, forgotten. Or so he thought. Because far beyond Earth, beyond the reach of their sensors, the Supreme Fleet was on its way. And with them came the storm that would shake the stars. The war was not over yet. The Supreme Fleet had been asleep for decades. Hidden deep within a swirling black nebula, the fleet's warships lay in perfect silence. No signals, no movement, no trace of life. To the rest of the galaxy, they were ghosts, forgotten relics of a war that had never come. And then, a whisper broke the silence, a distress call. Weak, filled with static, but unmistakable. A cry for help, a dying planet's final call. Inside the command deck of the Erebus, the Supreme Fleet's flagship, Admiral Jonathan Kane stood still, staring at the transmission. The screen flickered with a desperate message from Earth. Explosions in the background, people screaming, voices begging for help. Then, silence. Kane exhaled slowly. He had always known this day would come. Earth had abandoned them, sent them into exile, but in the end, they had nowhere else to turn. Commander Rachel Hayes stepped forward, her voice steady. "Sir, orders." Kane didn't hesitate. "Wake them up." All across the nebula, warships powered on. Engines hummed, reactors flared, and massive cannons adjusted their sights for the first time in years. Thousands of vessels, each one a floating fortress, roared to life. Deep in the heart of the fleet, pilots strapped into their fighters. Marines checked their weapons. Engineers raced through corridors, preparing for war. This was no ordinary fleet. It was the result of humanity's greatest minds, their most advanced technology. It was a weapon designed for one purpose, to end wars before they even began. And now, It was heading home. Kane stepped toward the main viewport, watching as the nebula's darkness began to break apart. "Set course for Earth," he commanded. "Maximum speed." The stars blurred as the Supreme Fleet jumped into hyperspace. They had been exiled, forgotten, left to rot in the shadows. But now, they were coming back. The enemy celebrated as Earth burned. Across the ruined cities, alien banners were raised. The last human strongholds had fallen, their defenses crushed under the sheer might of the invaders. Fires still rage, turning the sky into a thick haze of smoke and dust. The oceans were black with wreckage, the land scarred with deep craters where orbital strikes had torn apart entire regions. In the enemy command ship, Supreme Commander Vakov stood tall, gazing at the broken planet below. His reptilian features twisted into a cruel smile. He had expected a fight. He had expected resistance. Instead, humanity had crumbled. For centuries, there had been whispers of Earth's hidden strength, a war fleet unlike any other, a power so great it could rival the mightiest empires. But it had been a myth, a ghost story to scare children. Earth had fought with everything it had, and still, they have fallen. "Pathetic," Vakov muttered. His officers, tall and armored, stood in disciplined silence behind him. One of them, a scout commander, bowed and spoke in a low guttural tone. "My lord, our long-range sensors detect unusual movement beyond the system." Vakov did not turn. "Another band of survivors. Let them come. There is nothing left of their world." The officer hesitated. "This is something else." For the first time, Vakov glanced at the screen. His eyes narrowed. A fleet. Not just a fleet. An armada. Thousands of ships, each one radiating power, their signatures stronger than anything recorded before. Their formation was tight, disciplined, moving like a single organism. The dark expanse of space behind them seemed to warp as they advanced, breaking through the void like a tidal wave. Then, a transmission cut through every enemy ship, overriding their systems. The screen flickered to life, and a human appeared. An older man, his uniform crisp, his expression cold and unreadable. His piercing eyes locked onto the enemy commanders watching from their warships. Admiral Jonathan Kane. His voice was steady, controlled. "You should have finished the job." The transmission cut. And then, the first enemy battleship exploded. A single energy beam, precise and devastating, ripped through its core. The massive warship, once a symbol of the enemy's strength, detonated in a brilliant fireball. Debris scattered into space, fragments of metal spiraling out like broken glass. Panic spread through the enemy fleet. Alarms blared. Officers shouted. Vakov's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. "Impossible," he growled. Another explosion, then another, and another. The Supreme Fleet had arrived. From the blackness of space, Earth's forgotten warriors had returned. Their warships moved with terrifying efficiency, their weapons cutting through the invaders like a blade through flesh. Fighters swarmed out like hornets, their energy cannons leaving glowing trails in the dark. Massive dreadnoughts unleashed planetary-scale bombardments, vaporizing enemy capital ships in seconds. On Earth, the survivors looked to the sky. What had once been a battlefield of despair now burned with a new light, a fire of vengeance. The war was not over. It was only just beginning. The sky above Earth was no longer silent. The Supreme Fleet had arrived like a storm, tearing through the enemy armada with brutal precision. Thousands of warships, black and silver against the burning atmosphere, moved in perfect synchronization. Their weapons fired in measured bursts, each shot a calculated strike that shattered enemy formations. The invaders, once confident in their victory, now scrambled in confusion. Their fleet, vast and powerful, had never faced an opponent like this. Their ships, designed to dominate weaker species, were suddenly prey to something far more advanced, far more dangerous. Inside the Erebus, the command ship of the Supreme Fleet, Admiral Jonathan Kane stood with his hands clasped behind his back. The battle played out before him on a massive holographic display. His officers worked in practiced silence, executing maneuvers that had been drilled into them for decades. Enemy fleet is attempting to regroup, Commander Rachel Hayes reported, her fingers gliding across the control panel. They're pulling back to high orbit, trying to establish a defensive line. Kane nodded slightly. Good. Let them think they have a chance. He turned to another officer. Deploy the Harbinger-class warships. Target their flagships first. A single command. A single decision. And death followed. From the depths of space, massive, fortress-like warships emerged from the Supreme Fleet's formation. Each one was a city-sized behemoth, armed with weapons powerful enough to crack moons. Their hulls gleamed with ancient battle scars, testaments to wars fought long ago. Then they fired. Blinding beams of energy erupted from their cannons, carving through the enemy's fleet like fire through dry grass. Entire warships were vaporized in an instant, their crews never even realizing what had hit them. On the enemy command ship, Supreme Commander Vakoth watched in horror. His fleet, the same fleet that had crushed Earth's defenses with ease, was being obliterated. How? He snarled. How is this possible? His officers had no answer. The Supreme Fleet did not fight like other human forces. They did not hesitate, did not falter. Their tactics were ruthless, their strategies flawless. Every movement was precise, every strike devastating. Vakoth bared his fangs. Send in the dreadnoughts. Wipe them out. From the heart of the enemy formation, 3 colossal dreadnoughts surged forward. Each one was a titan of war, covered in thick armor and bristling with weapons. Their firepower had turned entire planets to dust. They charged their main cannons, preparing to unleash destruction upon the Supreme Fleet. But Kane was already 3 steps ahead. Activate the Aegis Protocol, he commanded. A ripple of blue energy spread across the Supreme Fleet, and suddenly, the enemy's weapons failed. Their missiles lost guidance. Their energy blasts fizzled into nothing. Their dreadnoughts, so used to being unstoppable, now found themselves completely exposed. And the Supreme Fleet did not waste time. A squadron of elite warships pierced through the dreadnought's defenses like arrows through cloth. Explosions rippled across the massive vessels as advanced missiles and energy lances tore them apart from the inside. One by one, the dreadnoughts exploded, their burning wreckage falling toward Earth's atmosphere. On the surface, the last human survivors watched in awe. Their world, which had seemed lost just hours ago, was now defended by a force beyond anything they had ever imagined. Hope returned. But the battle was not over. Deep within the enemy fleet, a hidden weapon was being prepared, a weapon designed to wipe out not just Earth, but the entire solar system. And as Kane watched the battlefield, his sharp eyes caught the movement. A single enemy ship, larger than any other, drifting toward Earth's surface. It was time to end this war. The battle raged on, but the Supreme Fleet knew that victory was within their grasp. However, the enemy was far from defeated. As much as they had tried to run and regroup, they still had one final card to play. From the heart of the alien armada, an enormous warship emerged, cloaked in energy fields. It was unlike anything the Supreme Fleet had ever seen. A planet killer. The ship's silhouette was immense, a floating city of doom, built to destroy worlds. Its massive cannons, powered by a dark, pulsing energy, began charging. The very atmosphere around it seemed to shimmer with malevolent power. On the bridge of the Erebus, Admiral Jonathan Kane's expression hardened. He had been expecting this. The invaders were too proud, too arrogant to just give up. They had one last desperate attempt to end the war with a weapon that could obliterate Earth and everything in its path. Target that ship. Kane's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of military command. All ships, focus fire on the planet killer. The Supreme Fleet moved as one. Every vessel, from the smallest fighter to the largest dreadnought, adjusted their course. The tension in the air was palpable. The Supreme Fleet had never faced a weapon of this magnitude. It wasn't just about military power anymore. It was a race against time. Inside the Erebus, Commander Rachel Hayes turned to Kane. "Sir, we don't have much time. That weapon is already charging up." "I know," Kane replied, his voice unwavering. "We hit them now, or it's all over." The first salvo from the enemy planet killer launched, an energy blast so bright it lit up the entire battlefield. The beam cut through the dark expanse of space like a fiery sword, heading straight for Earth. At that moment, the Supreme Fleet engaged. A series of thunderous explosions filled the void, energy weapons cutting across the blackness. The planet killer's shields flared to life, blocking most of the incoming fire, but the sheer volume of attacks forced the enemy vessel to stagger. Even so, it wasn't enough. The beast of destruction continued its charge. Then, Admiral Kane did something unexpected. He gave the order for the Erebus, the flagship of the Supreme Fleet, to enter the heart of the enemy formation. With a roar, the massive warship pushed forward, the engines roaring with unimaginable power as it moved directly into the path of the incoming fire. "Admiral, what are you doing?" Commander Hayes cried out. "You'll sacrifice the flagship." Kane's face was grim, his eyes never leaving the enemy weapon. "We have no choice. This is the only way to stop it." The Erebus surged forward with incredible speed, cutting through the debris of the fallen enemy ships as it approached the planet killer. As the massive energy beam fired once again, Kane's ship dodged just in time, the blast missing them by mere meters, but only by the smallest margin. Inside the Erebus, alarms blared as systems began to strain under the pressure. Weapon systems overloaded. Shields flickered. And yet they pushed forward. The crew worked in a feverish frenzy to keep the ship intact. "All hands, brace for impact." Kane's voice boomed through the ship's intercom. With a final, devastating charge, the Erebus slammed into the flank of the planet killer, driving its massive reinforced hull into the side of the enemy vessel. The shockwave sent a ripple of energy through space, rattling every ship in the vicinity. Explosions erupted from the point of impact as the flagship's hull began to tear through the enemy's outer armor. Kane's hand gripped the armrest of his command chair as the Erebus pushed further into the planet killer, tearing into its vulnerable core. It was a brutal, desperate battle. The planet killer fired again, but this time, it wasn't at Earth. The beam was aimed at the Erebus. The flagship's shields flared up and sparked as the impact hit, but they held, just barely. Yet, Kane knew that this wasn't a fight of endurance anymore. It was a fight for the survival of Earth. The rest of the fleet wasn't sitting idle. The smaller, more agile ships moved in with pinpoint accuracy, targeting the weak spots in the planet killer's remaining defenses. The final blow came from a squadron of elite bombers, whose payloads, combined with the relentless barrage from the Supreme Fleet's remaining ships, finally breached the planet killer's core. A final explosion, a burst of light brighter than 1,000 suns, ripped through the space around them. The planet killer shattered in a deafening blast, its remaining debris scattering into the cold vacuum. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then came the cheer. On the Erebus, the crew erupted in triumphant applause. It wasn't just the destruction of the planet killer that mattered, it was the victory. Earth had been saved, and the invaders' greatest weapon had been reduced to nothing. But Kane knew the war wasn't over yet. The battle had been won, but the fight for Earth's future had just begun. And as the Supreme Fleet hovered above the remains of the enemy armada, it was clear humanity was no longer a weak species. They had shown their strength, and they had claimed their place in the stars. The Supreme Fleet's victory was not the end. It was a mere pause in the chaos that had consumed Earth. The enemy was broken, their once formidable armada reduced to drifting wreckage across the black expanse of space. But deep within the debris, something stirred. A final, secret weapon. Admiral Jonathan Kane stood at the center of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. His face, usually unreadable, now bore the weight of a looming decision. The battle had been brutal, but Earth was safe, for now. However, he knew that the enemy had one last trick up their sleeve. It had been whispered about in the darkest corners of the alien fleet: the Omega Protocol. A weapon capable of wiping out entire solar systems. It was designed to be the ultimate insurance policy, a fail-safe in case of defeat. The invaders had used their greatest weapon, the planet killer, and it had been destroyed. But they still had one last card to play. Kane's comms officer, Lieutenant Ives, turned to him with a solemn look. "Admiral," she said, her voice low, "we're receiving a transmission. It's from the alien fleet's last remaining command vessel." Kane's heart sank. "What are they saying?" Ives hesitated before speaking again. "They've activated the Omega Protocol. It's a matter disintegration bomb, designed to implode the entire solar system. If we don't stop it, Earth will be gone." The room went quiet. The weight of the words hung heavy in the air. A weapon like that would erase everything. The Supreme Fleet, Earth's last hope, would be obliterated. But Kane wasn't one to surrender. He had led his people through the fire once, and he would do it again. "Track their signal," Kane ordered, his voice steady. "We've got one shot at this. We're not going to let this happen." Outside the Earth's atmosphere, the Supreme Fleet moved into position. They had been triumphant, but victory had come at a cost. Several ships were heavily damaged, their systems in critical condition. But none of that mattered. Time was running out. Kane's voice echoed through the fleet's intercom. "This is it. We don't have the luxury of playing it safe anymore. If we don't take out that weapon, there will be nothing left to save. We strike fast, hit hard, and we do it together. This is the final push, people. Let's finish it." The fleet moved as one, the massive warships maneuvering through the stars with precision. Kane's flagship, the Erebus, led the charge, its weapons locked and ready. A moment of tense silence passed before the orders were given. The Omega Protocol was housed in a massive command ship at the far end of the alien formation. It was shielded with layers of advanced technology, far beyond anything the Supreme Fleet had faced. It was a fortress, built to withstand everything. And yet, it had one weakness: a single, narrow-energy conduit that powered the entire weapon. Destroy that, and the bomb would implode in on itself, neutralizing the threat. Kane's eyes locked onto the screen where the enemy flagship loomed in the distance. He could almost feel the pulse of its shields, the thrum of its engines. It was moving toward a trajectory that would bring it dangerously close to the heart of the solar system. If they didn't act quickly, they would lose everything. "Target that ship's core." Kane's voice cut through the tension, his mind working 100 steps ahead. "Deploy the elite strike teams. We'll need precision. If we miss, it's over." The Supreme Fleet moved into attack position. The strike teams, the best of the best, would be deployed on specialized fighters designed for deep penetration missions. Their goal was simple: breach the enemy's fortress and disable the weapon. But the enemy wasn't going down without a fight. As the Supreme Fleet surged forward, the enemy flagship fired first. Massive energy beams, once reserved for planetary destruction, lit up the dark void of space. They cut across the blackness like deadly lasers, slamming into the Supreme Fleet's shields and sending shockwaves through the ships. "Return fire," Kane ordered. "All ships target their shields. Break them down." The Erebus fired its main cannons, sending ripples of energy crashing into the enemy flagship. But it wasn't enough. The shields held, and the Omega Protocol continued to hum in the background, threatening to end everything. A squadron of fighter ships broke away from the formation, their engines roaring as they sped toward the heart of the enemy fleet. Kane watched as they navigated through a maze of fire and destruction, dodging incoming blasts while heading straight for the weak point in the enemy's armor. Minutes passed like hours. The tension was unbearable, every second that ticked by bringing them closer to oblivion. Finally, as the strike teams made their final approach, The Erebus moved into position, its weapons charged for a last-ditch strike. The elite fighters launched their missiles, aimed directly at the energy conduit. The explosion was deafening, a burst of light so bright it could have been mistaken for a second sun. But it was not enough. The Omega Protocol was still alive, still ticking. Kane's heart raced. They needed one more hit, one final blow to end this. "Prepare the Aegis torpedoes," Kane barked, his voice cold. "Target their core. This is our only chance." As the torpedoes were released, Kane felt a sense of inevitability. The energy was so pure, so concentrated, that if it worked, it would be the end of the enemy's weapon and their last attempt at survival. Seconds stretched into eternity, until, finally, the torpedoes struck. The entire enemy flagship seemed to collapse in on itself. A final explosion rocked the battlefield. The Omega Protocol, the last hope of the enemy, vanished in a burst of raw power. The solar system was safe. Earth was safe. For now. But Kane knew the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The battlefield was silent, the once thriving war zone now littered with the wreckage of alien ships and smoldering debris. Earth's survival had been secured, but the aftermath of the final strike was far from a simple victory. Kane stood at the center of the bridge of the Erebus, staring out into the void. The Omega Protocol had been destroyed, but a quiet unease settled over him. The war might be over, but the scars left by the invasion would take years, perhaps decades, to heal. Even as the fleet began to regroup, a sense of eerie stillness hung in the air. The Supreme Fleet's warriors, bloody but unbowed, took stock of their surroundings, tending to their ships and preparing for the inevitable next steps. The battle had been won, but the war was far from finished. Earth had been saved, yes, but the galaxy was still in chaos, and the enemies that sought to destroy humanity were far from vanquished. Admiral. Commander Rachel Hayes approached, her face marked by both exhaustion and determination. "We've received reports from Earth's remaining military forces. They're calling it the Great Reclamation. The survivors are beginning to rebuild, but the destruction is immense." Kane nodded slowly, his mind already working through the possibilities. Earth has always been resilient. This is just another chapter in their history. We must ensure they are ready for what comes next. For the first time in years, a small spark of hope flickered in Kane's chest. They had been exiled for so long, the Supreme Fleet forgotten and discarded by Earth's own people. But now the bond between them was reforged. They had come back, and Earth would rise from the ashes, not just as a planet, but as a force to be reckoned with. The Supreme Fleet, the last vestige of Earth's once mighty military, had proven its worth. Now, it was time to ensure that the legacy they had left behind would not be one of mere survival, but of triumph. "Contact the other fleet commanders," Kane said, his voice hardening. "We need to coordinate with Earth's leadership. There's no time to waste. The galaxy's power structure is in flux. We can't afford to let the invaders regroup. If they do, we will be facing a war on every front." As the communication channels buzzed to life, Kane's thoughts turned to the future. The Supreme Fleet was the last defense humanity had, its power unmatched by anything else in known space. Yet, despite the destruction of the Omega Protocol, the galaxy's aggressors were far from done. Kane knew that the real war was just beginning. Back on Earth, the survivors began to rebuild in the wake of the destruction. The cities were in ruins, whole nations torn apart, but life had not been extinguished. With the Supreme Fleet's return, humanity's will to survive was reignited. Yet the question remained, what came next? In the hushed corridors of Earth's leadership, debates raged on. Governments, once fractured and weak, began to unify in the face of the alien threat. The Supreme Fleet, their protector and savior, had shown humanity that they could still hold their ground. But it wasn't just about defending Earth anymore. "We need to prepare for an uncertain future," said General Samuel Cole, standing at a large holographic map of the galaxy. The invaders have been driven back, but they are not defeated. What if they come back with reinforcements? What if they return with a new weapon, a stronger one? We must make sure that Earth is no longer just a target, said Vice President Alana Carter, her voice sharp. The fleet has proven its worth, but we need to ensure we can stand on our own. We must learn from this. Our enemies are out there, and they will never stop. The tension in the room was palpable. The world was faced with a single, undeniable truth. The peace they had fought so hard for was fragile. The Supreme Fleet, while unmatched in firepower, could not fight forever. They needed to rebuild their forces, not just to defend, but to secure their future. And so, the Great Reclamation began. Back aboard the Erebus, Kane's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, urgent message. He turned to Lieutenant Ives, his face darkening as she handed him the data packet. "Admiral, you need to see this." Kane's eyes scanned the data quickly. It was a message from an unknown source, intercepted in deep space, its encryption too advanced for normal means of decoding. But one line stood out, sending a chill down his spine. "The Supreme Fleet is only the beginning." The message was brief, but it carried an unmistakable threat. It was clear now that the invaders' defeat was not an isolated event, but a catalyst. There were others, factions, warlords, alliances, across the galaxy, watching Earth's struggle. Kane knew the time for passive defense was over. They had to act now to prepare the next generation of Earth's warriors. The Supreme Fleet had been the backbone of their defense, but it couldn't protect them forever. Humanity needed more. They needed to forge alliances. They needed to expand. And they needed to show the galaxy that Earth would never again be an easy target. "Get me the fleet commanders," Kane said, his voice hard as steel. "We're going to need more ships, more firepower. And this time, we fight not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy." As the Supreme Fleet readied itself for the next phase, the message was clear. The invaders had learned a harsh lesson, but so had Earth. They were no longer a helpless species. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they would do whatever it took to secure their place among the stars.